of the country's NDCs refer to the agriculture sector. In this respect, FAO has therefore prioritized providing support to countries on NDC implementation and formulation within its climate change strategy. FAO has analyzed the shared challenges and needs that many developing countries may experience implementing their NDCs. So FAO has also identified interrelated areas of intervention that are applicable to all areas of FAO works on climate change. The acknowledgement of support by climate action engagement package. So colleagues, we are grateful to the climate action enhancement package assisting developing countries, member of the NDC partnership, in achieving two overarching objectives, namely, first, enhancement of NDCs including by raising ambition as part of the Paris Agreement NDC update process, and fast-tracked implementation of NDCs, including by providing in-country technical expertise and capacity building. So I think the opportunity this morning is for the next 2 days is really providing capacity building for colleagues in Eswatini. So in Eswatini, the Climate Action Enhancement Package has partnered with the Ministry of Tourism and Environment, Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa, the Commonwealth Secretariat, FAO, NDC Partnership Support Unit, the UN Environment Programme and World Resources Institute to implement the NDC Partnership Support Initiative. So through this partnership, FAO has been tasked with implementing five of the activities covering climate risk mapping, identification of livestock emissions reduction options, development of a green growth strategy, assisting in design of climate smart policy instruments, as well as facilitating multi-stakeholder dialogue. Closely linked to this work, FAO has also mobilized resources for the work we are gathering here for today, which is aimed at strengthening capacities of personnel linked to the livestock sector in Eswatini in relation to Tier 2 modeling of greenhouse gas emissions and presentation of greenhouse gas mitigation options for ruminant livestock in Eswatini and recommendation on possible next steps toward a low carbon livestock sector. The areas of support in the implementation of NDCs on the ground. Globally and in Eswatini, there are a number of areas of work which FAO supports on the ground, including, firstly, enhanced transparency framework. One of the key elements of the Paris Agreement is the enhanced transparency framework, which requires countries to provide national inventory reports of their greenhouse gas emissions and information on the progress made in implementing their nationally determined contributions. This is part of the work that is being conducted in Eswatini through the NDC partnership and part of the reason why we are having this workshop. It also includes building a comprehensive greenhouse gas emissions inventory and the importance of moving from Tier 1 to Tier 2. Secondly, research, analysis, and tools. FAO develops and disseminates new tools and guidelines to assist countries in analyzing the impact of climate change, planning appropriate responses to this impact, and meeting new national reporting requirements. The Global Livestock Environmental Assessment Model to model the greenhouse gas emissions in Eswatini, which will be discussed and shared in this workshop, is also one of the tools. Third is capacity development for implementation of an action in the agriculture sector. A lack of capacities can prevent many developing countries from scaling up climate action in the agriculture sector. Some stakeholders may have the technical capacities and expertise to support sustainable and climate smart agriculture development, but lack the functional capacities to put this expertise into practice. So FAO is committed to building the technical and functional capacities of Eswatini so that the country can fulfill their NDC's commitments and make progress towards achieving sustainable climate smart agriculture development. And fourthly is mobilizing investment in the development of agriculture sectors. The agriculture sectors continue to receive only a modest share of international climate finance. However, financing flows need to reflect the importance that developing countries assign to adoption and agriculture, to adaptation and agriculture. FAO helps countries to mobilize financing, use domestic expenditure more effectively, and overcome the barriers that inhibit private investment in sustainable climate-smart agriculture development. In this respect, I'm happy to note that concrete progress is already being made with the government of Eswatini, mainly through the Ministry of Tourism and Environment and the Ministry of Agriculture, in collaboration with other partners to mobilize climate finance from the Green Climate Fund. I'm sure there are other opportunities which can be further explored in the future to support the government of Eswatini in mobilizing climate finance. In conclusion, it is important to underscore the need for strengthening data systems for the Tier 2 greenhouse gas inventory in Eswatini, addressing associated challenges, data gaps, and data improvement. Secondly, the need for strengthening mitigation actions for the livestock sector in Eswatini, collaboration and partnership in climate action, including strengthening multi-level and multi-sectoral coordination, and lastly, the need for increased concrete actions in mobilizing climate finance in order to form a good basis for delivering the NDCs, in particular in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So I'm concluding here by wishing you a fruitful 2 days workshop and training, and we hope that this training opportunity will really provide the capacities to our counterparts in Eswatini in strengthening their capacity in greenhouse gas emission and to be able to address the challenges I just mentioned here. So ladies and gentlemen, FAO colleagues, thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Patrice, for that very comprehensive introduction. We also have online the Director of Meteorology Department, Dudu, and I would like to just ask Dudu if she would like to provide us with some opening remarks as well.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. It's quite a pleasure for me to be part of this meeting. However, I would like to say that unfortunately I will not be able to stay throughout the training, but at least to see so many people participating and to have the support from FAO, for us it's quite a pleasure. And for me, it's to just accept and appreciate the supports that we are getting as a country, and assure FAO and all partners that being able to improve the greenhouse gas inventory for the country, and in particular the livestock sector, is a priority for us, as it will allow us to improve the whole inventory and also to be in a position to identify how exactly we can work on our mitigation as a country, and where we can commit. And I would like to challenge participants to take this training seriously and learn a lot. I believe there's a lot to learn, and as we are learning all that we are learning, can we also start thinking already how we can improve the livestock sector in the country. It's for us as a Maswati, livestock is our gold. For a lot of people, you can't separate them from their livestock. But if we can be able to identify areas where we can improve livestock management, not only will it improve on the climate action that we as a country can undertake, but I believe it has a potential to improve the livestock management for the benefit of Maswati. And having said that, I really appreciate this opportunity and look forward to having to having a pool of professionals who are in a position to assist us, not only with the inventory, ensuring that it is we get good quality tier 2 inventory for the livestock sector, but also to advise the livestock sector how to improve on it. I will not go much further than that, but I will just wish you all a fruitful 2 days and look forward to reaping the results of this wonderful training that we are having this 2 days. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Dudu. That was very nice. And lastly, I would also like to invite Constance Delamini, who is the UNFCCC focal point, to give us some introductory comments. Constance? Constance online?
Sorry, I think she was online. Maybe she dropped off. When she comes back, maybe we can give her a chance. Also just requesting if we can take a group.
Deepa became muted there briefly. So yeah, we'd like to take a group photo if we can. So if everybody who's able to could switch their cameras on briefly, then we'll do the group photograph in the usual Zoom manner. Armando, are you going to capture the screen or something?
Yeah, give me 1 second. Let's wait that everyone.
So if people could briefly switch their cameras on and we'll... That may be everybody who has a camera. Some people will be using devices that don't have cameras. Yeah, still have people coming.
I think that we are ready.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Big smile from everybody.
Okay.
Okay.
Perfect.
Thank you all very, very much. Wonderful. Well, thank you for those opening remarks. And if Constance comes online again, we can also hear from Constance. So, in the interest of time, we're 15 minutes behind time, but let's crack on anyway. Sizwe Mabaso and Samkeli Fwala will be giving us now an overview of the livestock sector in Eswatini, talking about trends, production systems, development and socio-economy. So if you would be able to please share your screens. Sizwe and Samkeli have been working very closely with us in the as the sort of focal points in the country to implement this work, and have been working tirelessly to gather together all the data and to consult with experts in Eswatini and provide the connection for us at headquarters in Rome. Would you please share your screen, I think?
It's been disabled. Could you please, Amanda?
Now it's able.
Okay, thank you. I hope I'm audible enough.
You're very audible.
Thank you.
But we still can't see your screen.
Still disabled, unfortunately.
Okay, give me 1 second. Now, can you try, please?
Yes, that's fine. That's all right now. Thank
Okay,
you.
perfect.
Please confirm once it's up.
It's
As we can see.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. As Tim has introduced me, I'm Sizwe. I'm with the University of Eswatini, but currently engaged as a consultant, working with Dr. Samuel Etwala, who is also here, and will jump in wherever he feels I've not done justice to this very short presentation. So our task is just to quickly give an overview of the livestock sector in Eswatini, just looking at the trends, the systems, development, as well as the social economics of the sector. So I'll just quickly run through a background, then look at livestock production systems, and then as well as try link briefly just livestock and GHG, even though Juliana will expand more on that. So in Eswatini, agriculture is influenced by mainly land tenure systems, as well as the agroecological zones. And in the country, we have three types of land tenure systems. There is the Swazi Nation land, which is covering 75% of the country. Then there is also title deed, which covers 24%, and then only 1% is crown land. And then there is also 4 major agroecological zones, which sometimes we refer to as physiographic zones. But of the 4, 2 are further classified into the middle field and the low field. There is the upper middle field and the lower middle field, as well as sorry about that. There's the upper middle field and the lower middle field. Similarly, as the low field is also divided into 2 in terms of the conditions that are dominant in these 2 regions. But we thought that for this work, it would be important to further dig more into the respective physiographic or ecographic regions of the country, starting with the high field. It's the one with the highest altitude in the western part of the country. It's mainly grassland. However, this grassland is what we classify as sour field. And during the summer, it produces good quality grazing and has a high carrying capacity. However, when winter creeps in, the feed value is greatly reduced, and the grass becomes unpalatable to livestock. And then for the middle field, it's kind of a mixture. It lies between the high field and the low field, ranging between 400 and 800 meters on average. It's drier and warmer than the high field, but still cooler than the low field. This one is just a combination, as I've said, of the 2. So it would be a bit of grassland, but also with a mix of forest in these rangelands. And then the low field is ideally the most suited for grazing, because it's the one what we call the sweet field, with a good grass cover for grazing, but also scattered trees and bushes, dominantly the acacia species. The Lubombo Plateau is just very much comparable to the middle field. Many a time you find that it's sometimes grouped as the middle field as well, but slightly different even in terms of the altitude. But in terms of the grass, it's also very similar to the middle field, as I've said. And then to highlight is that, as I've said, that Swazi Nation land is about 70%, 75% in terms of coverage for the whole country. And then it also follows then that it's dominant in terms of livestock distribution in the country. And according to the Minister of Agriculture, as of 2020, there was about 80% of our livestock was in this source nation land, basically communal land. And in this communal land, what is the dominant attributes of this part is that it's just smallholder farmers who are just sharing even the grazing land. And in this, what is dominant here is that it's, as I've said, it's shared communal grazing land. Mostly farmers will be practicing night crawling, whereby livestock is rounded up almost every evening, so that it's in the crawls for the night. But it's not always the case throughout the country, but it's just a common practice. And then each farmer will look after their own stock. And even though the ministry, government through the Ministry of Agriculture does encourage that farmers should keep their stock within reasonable numbers, still there isn't like a limit on the number of livestock that a farmer can keep. And then in winter, animals supplement on feed through foraging. Of course, the common one would be the crop residues, being the maize stalks, but you find that some farmers would be able to even fence off some portions of their areas so that they can be able to supplement their feed on their livestock. A critical department in the Ministry of Agriculture for this sector is the Veterinary and Livestock Services Department that provides a lot of support to these farmers. One of those support would be the dipping program, but also in as far as just controlling as well as tracing livestock movement around the country. So whether you are even importing livestock to the country, there'll be the department that will be responsible for controlling as well as tracing what goes where. This is just a map now illustrating just the distribution. Of course, it's not the most up to date, but it's just illustrating the distribution of the dipping tanks that they are distributed across the country, especially on the Swaz Nation land, where we're saying there is a focus on, there's the concentration of these farmers that are rearing these livestock. So from this map, you can even see where there is the dominance of the dipping tanks and likely the dominance of even the livestock, where mostly there will be higher livestock numbers in terms of the distribution. And then this department is also responsible for the production of annual reports on livestock. This is just an example now of a table that was derived from such a report, whereby it's just a summary of the totals for livestock by the administrative region of the country for cattle for a certain year. So they'll do that for cattle. And for cattle, goats, and sheep, it's easier to come up with such because of the dipping program that was just highlighted. But it's not as detailed for other livestock like poultry, pigs, because those, for us to get the statistics, would depend on the annual census, which basically these ones, we wouldn't have access to them in the dipping tanks as the other three that I've mentioned. Then also another thing to highlight is that this sector, as a market director, to highlight it, it's a very critical sector in the country, both in terms of our socio-cultural standing, but especially economically. It accounts for more than 13% of the country's GDP. And livestock is one of the key contributors in the agriculture sector. And as of 2020, the contribution of livestock in the sector stood at over 50%. And the graph to your right is just now highlighting that as a country, even though there is usually an annual growth rate in the GDP, but many a times we found ourselves having it hard because of things like, for example, now and again, we've had incidences of El Nino, whereby we experience bouts of drought. And in that case, that is when, like, for example, we had one in 2015, 2016. So during that time, you could see that our annual growth rate in the sector was negative. But then thereafter, as of 2018, then things started improving again. Then moving forward, and then to just touch more on the services that the Department of Vet and Livestock provide to farmers. It includes the provision of extension services. We've already spoken about the dipping program that they provide. They also provide access to improved bulls, provide access to fattening ranges around the country. And then they also assist farmers with the promotion of feed and fodder production, as well as the utilization of supplementary feeding amongst the farmers. So basically, it all points to that the ministry is all about trying to enhance productivity in the sector. And then quickly on just the production side now. This table just shows now the trend between 2016 and 2019, whereby we see that, of course, you would expect 2017, 2018 to still be reeling from the effects of the drought that we had experienced between 2015 and 2016. But by 2015, you see again as an increase on the total populations of our livestock. Here, we are also seeing that, especially for calves, continually between 2016 all the way to 2019, we've seen a constant increase. But in terms of mortality, it was highest in 2016, but you come to 2017 and 2018, it went down fairly well, but again, we see a hike in 2019. And such work, of course, we are hoping that it will enhance the standing of the country to ensure that such things like mortality, we reduce them. And then quickly looking at on the export side now for beef, we produce beef. And these are just the statistics now showing that we still export a lot of beef, especially to the European market, as well as to Mozambique and South Africa. One may wonder what was happening in 2018, because then we just had a massive dip in what we exported. What had happened there was that we had, I think, delayed. Somebody will confirm this. I think we had delayed rains, which then affected productivity in that year, which then resulted in the dip. Otherwise, generally, we still export a lot to these countries that I've mentioned, especially Norway for EU. And then there is also a lot that goes to Mozambique, and still a decent number that goes to South Africa. And then quickly looking at the other livestock types, pigs, goats, sheep, and poultry. For these, for all these years that we are showing here, you can see that there's a consistent rise in the numbers. And worth noting is that even with the slaughter, there's been a consistent hike in the number of slaughter, even though we took a dip in the number of sheep that were slaughtered in 2019. I don't know what the reason would be, but for the other livestock like pigs and goats, you can see the consistency in the hike in the number of livestock that was slaughtered in the years. And then there is also the component of dairy production in the country. It is quite an important activity in the country as a source of income, but especially for also employment opportunities. The dairy industry is developed and regulated by the Eswatini Dairy Board in the country, who are just aiming to develop and promote production as well as consumption of quality dairy products by coordinating and harmonizing all the activities in the industry. And then they provide a whole suite of services which are just aimed at ensuring that that goal is achieved. However, we are still lagging behind. We are still not meeting productivity, the demand in the country. So the table below will show that there's still a decent number of, there's still high quantities that we are able to produce as a country, but still a majority of what we are consuming is still from South Africa. We are still importing from neighboring countries. Otherwise, as a country, we are able to produce dairy juice, sour milk, yogurt, fresh milk, as well as cream. But as I've highlighted, this table is just showing that we still, this data is in liters. We are still importing quite a lot from South Africa, which talks to the issue that we still have our work cut out as a country in as far as ensuring that we maximize in production of dairy products. And then I will end off by just highlighting this. I did say that this is for Juliana to go more into these details. For me, it would just be to give an overview that as a country, we are also seeing that the agriculture, forestry, and land use and other land use basically are followed where agriculture falls, is the leading sector in terms of emissions for the country, with almost 50% contribution. So, and worth noting is that in this sector, livestock is one of the key categories. And this slide is just highlighting that in as much as it is not the leading category in the follow sector, it is still one of the key categories. And of course, worth noting, if you look at row number 3, it is that for the years here, since 1990 all the way to 2018, even though the emissions have gone down over the years, they have remained relatively high for any activity to do with livestock. Similarly, for the column under menu management, it's not as significant as the other sectors, but still it has remained an emitter over the years. Same for indirect N2O from menu, it's still the same thing that we are noting there. So this is just highlighting that the livestock sector is one sector as a country that would want to improve in order to ensure that we reduce our emissions. As I've highlighted, you see that between 1990 and 2018, it's gone down in terms of change, it's negative, but you see that non-dairy, which is basically a lot of the livestock that we find, especially in communal lands, still remains the highest contributor of emissions in the country. So that is an important thing to highlight. And same for menu management, the same would hold true, that for non-dairy, where most of our livestock is, it still remains very, very high. If you compare with the other subcategories, the other kinds of livestock, it's not as high as it is for non-dairy. And goats too, and sheep, you see that they are much higher than the rest of the other kinds of livestock. I think that is it. Thank you so much. Armand, back to you.
Thank you very much, Samkeli. That was a very clear overview of the livestock sector. We're going to crack on with Juliana's presentation, and then there's an opportunity for some questions and answers after that. Juliana is a consultant who used to work in our team, but she now works with CBC, which is the FAO's Climate, Biodiversity, Land and Water Unit. And Juliana is going to talk about the sources of greenhouse gas emissions from the diverse livestock systems in Eswatini, referring to direct and indirect emissions. So Juliana, over to you. Thank you very much.
Okay, do you see the screen? Is everything okay?
Perfect. Perfectly, we hear you clearly.
So first of all, thank you for the invitation. I am personally very happy to participate in this meeting because it is the basis for that Eswatini is the way that Eswatini is going for advancing the greenhouse gas inventory and illustrating its commitments towards the NDCs in terms of climate mitigation and adaptation, and therefore I'm very happy to be here. So my presentation, I will be presenting, yes, okay. So first of all, I would like to ask all of you, so what does a low carbon livestock future looks like? And in order to answer this question, we need to understand what is the sector's contributions to emissions, what are the main sources of emissions from the sector, how we can reduce, like which would be the areas, the key areas that should be targeted for reducing emissions, and where are the key quick wins, especially considering that livestock, most part of the emissions coming from livestock are in the form of methane. These would offer us an opportunity for reducing emissions in a short term. And the start pointing for all of these is to able to quantify the emissions from the sectors and reflecting the national circumstances. And this is the work that FAO has been doing with UNEP in Eswatini for the inventory for estimating the emissions from the livestock sector. So when we think about the livestock, like when we think about the emissions from the livestock sector, the first emissions that come to mind are the emissions that are directly emitted by the animals, which are enteric methane and the emissions related to manure. And those are the emissions in the IPCC guidelines, considering as direct livestock emissions. But when we think about the livestock value chain, these emissions go beyond just the direct ones, because we have emissions related to feed production, fertilizer, processing of the milk and meat, and energy. Therefore, the overall emissions from the sector go beyond the just direct ones. But given the way that the emissions are, given the way that IPCC, the natural sector approach, attributes emissions to other sectors, I think it's important to have this broader view of the sector, especially when considering mitigation options. So, but how does Eswatini GHG emissions look like? So according to what the country had reported in its third national communication, Eswatini had emitted about 4,800 gigatons of CO2 equivalent in 2010. With the agriculture sector representing 33% of these emissions. Within agriculture, direct livestock emissions accounted for 53% of those agricultural emissions. And the inventory here is important to highlight that the emissions that were reported in the third national communication were based on the 1996 IPCC guidelines, and it used the Tier 1 methodology to estimate emissions. As also what Suzie pointed out, given the magnitude of enteric fermentation emissions, enteric fermentation is a key category for Eswatini, and efforts should be prioritized to apply advanced tier methods, such as the Tier 2, and that's what exactly part of this work from FAO and UNEP currently doing in the country. However, not before, like livestock emissions contributed to 52% of the total agriculture emissions. But when we look at ruminant emissions, and here I'm presenting just the ruminants because that's what the data that I had available. But when we look at ruminant emissions under a life cycle assessment approach, which is a technique that analyzes the environmental performance of a product or a service through its whole life cycle process, we see that methane, enteric methane, is still the main source of greenhouse gas emissions, but there are other sources that are also relevant, such as applied manure, and which mitigation practices could be also found on those areas. So here, explaining a little bit about this graph. So according to IPCC, the direct sources of emissions for livestock are fermentation, manure management in terms of nitrous oxide and methane. But then, like according to the Gleam model, that given the approach that the Gleam model takes, it also estimates the emissions related to feed, which under the IPCC, it would fall into the sources of emissions for croplands, forests, and grasslands, and also the emissions related to processing, which under the IPCC would be allocated to energy and industrial process. And then, so when we think about mitigation, and I think this is something important to have in mind, because I know that the next steps will be to define the mitigations for the livestock sector. Okay, the mitigation potential, according to the IPCC, would be falling into the direct emissions. But it would be important to also consider that the real mitigation potential from the livestock sector is in its the whole value chain, and there are opportunities to reduce emissions in the feed part, probably like using better better agriculture practices, reducing burning, or treating the manure in a different way. And type of greenhouse gas inventories do countries need to meet the reporting requirements? So, okay, we understand that the livestock, the emissions from livestock, they must be tracked. But in the same way, Eswatini, as being part, as when it signed the Paris Agreement, it also as part of the UNFCCC, Eswatini has some reporting requirements, and then Eswatini has to comply with some of these requirements. So first of all, which type of inventories Eswatini need? So Eswatini needs an inventory, a greenhouse gas inventory that can reflect the national circumstances, and this is due to advanced methods such as the tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 that I won't be explaining here now because this will be the topic of the next presentation. Then another relevant point is to use the 2006 IPCC guidelines or any subsequent version or refinement. Also, reporting these emissions following the common reporting tables, which are the same ones that before were the reporting that Annex 1 countries, that developed countries use to report under the UNFCCC, and using a threshold of 95% for identifying the key categories. And therefore, when for these key categories, applying advanced tiers, and having a time series that shall start in 1990 and have a consistent annual time series from at least 2020 onwards. Then also, okay, so we have the national greenhouse gas inventory, but also countries and Eswatini has to track the progress of the NDC. And so it seems that are a lot of small pieces, but all these pieces must come together. And I know the work right now, it's for the inventory and for the NDC revision, but in the future, Eswatini also has to submit the biennial transparency report. This basically, the biennial transparency report, it's a vehicle that provides information on the status, action, and support towards the NDCs. And it has to be submitted by 1st of December of 2024. So we see we have 3 years, but as all this process, it can take a while. And the biennial transparency report requires targets, NDC targets, and require a system and a framework to establish and track the achievements of these targets. So it has also, so I'm presenting this right now because I think it will be part of the next stage of the exercise when deciding about the mitigations. But it has to include the national circumstances and how they will affect the emissions and removals from the sector, the institutional arrangements for implementing, monitoring, and reporting the NDC. It has to have a clear description of the NDC target, including reference point, the baseline years, the time frame, the scope and coverage, what are the strategies, the plans and actions, which type of instruments the countries are using to reduce these emissions, and if there is any type of support that was received. And so, like here, I would like to end saying that the net contribution of the livestock sector mixed to GHG emissions will depend on how these emissions are estimated. So we have the IPCC guidelines that are the basis for the inventory and reporting purpose under the convention. But on the other side, and by using Gleam, we also have the life cycle assessment approach, which can provide for the government overall overview of the sector that can support mitigation planning, policy making, and long-term target setting. And then just considering the future, the efforts should be combined to estimate and report emissions following not only what is needed now, that is the national inventory and the NDC revision, but also considering the future requirements under the convention, which are the national inventory report and the biennial transparency report. With that, I thank you for your attention. And if we have time, I would be happy to answer questions, or afterwards also, because I think we are running out, I would be happy to answer. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Juliana. And that's, so that brings us to our first questions and answer session. So if people have questions for Juliana or Sam Kelly, could you please raise your hands? Perhaps you could stop sharing your screen, Juliana, and then I'll have a bigger view of the audience.
I just need to find out how to. I thought I had stopped.
Maybe there's just a delay.
Not yet. Armando, maybe can you help me?
Do we have questions for Juliana and Sam Kelly, please? If you could raise your hands, raising your hands, on my version of Zoom, you use the reactions button, which is on the bottom right of the screen. And so it's quite clear from Sam Kelly's presentation that the livestock sector, the dynamics are quite fluid, really, and so there are significant increases and decreases in numbers year on year, depending on the prevailing environmental and animal health situation. So that's going to be a challenge taking this work forward, I think. Perhaps Sam Kelly, you could tell us about that and how you think it might impact on inventory work.
Come again, Timothy. I think I missed that.
Sorry, I was just commenting, Sam Kelly, on the sort of year-to-year fluctuations in animal numbers and productivity, which seems to me to be quite a challenge to doing inventory work, because you really need quite up-to-date data to follow the moving target, if you like. Do you think that's an issue?
It could be an issue, but what I've noticed is that the fluctuation in numbers usually are mainly due to things like the El Nino that we experienced in 2015, 2016. I think that is one of the key things that are causing the fluctuation. I'm not sure if I capture what you are.
Yeah. No. I mean, this is what I'm talking about. These year-on-year fluctuations that have a sort of, cause a drop in numbers, and then there's a recovery.
That would definitely have an impact on the inventory.
Yeah. Aimable.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm Aimable. I work for FAO. I want to ask one question mainly regarding the El Nino effect. So what was the key impact of El Nino on livestock? So can you maybe elaborate a little bit more about what was the issue? So it was about the availability of feed, or it had a direct impact on in increased mortality in animals and so on. So because it was not clear to me what was the key effect of El Nino on the sector. Over.
Basically, it was increase in mortality.
If I may jump in.
Yes, please, Sizwe.
Yes. Basically, first the feed was affected because there was barely anything on the rangelands, and as we had highlighted, most of the farmers, they only supplement, but the dominant feed is from those communal rangelands. So when the El Nino took its toll, then there was barely anything for the livestock. And then that, as it prolonged, then we started to see very high mortalities in the livestock.
Yeah. Okay. We have a question from, oh, sorry.
No, but maybe there are other participants, so maybe they can contribute, and then I have a question for Sizwe, but okay. I can go after.
The next question was from Huawei, whose name I don't know, but they seem to have dropped off the call for now. So if they come back, we can chase that up. But Robert Mabunza, you have a question for us? When you ask a question, please just introduce yourself and say roughly, very quickly, who you are.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Robert Mabunza. I'm currently working for Eswatini, a government parastatal responsible for, community development, mostly using water as a catalyst. I'm based in one of the projects, smallholder market-led project, which focuses on livestock value chains. At the same time, I'm also a national consultant for FAO, responsible for specific value chains, including livestock and horticulture. So it's my first time to participate in this workshop or this engagement. And it's my pleasure to be part of this process because it is linked to my current assignment and the overall, objectives of the project that I'm working on. So I have two questions. Pardon me if these questions were asked before, but with my understanding, I'm trying to get a link between the two presentations. With the first one, I understand that we are looking at the general trends, the production systems, but then in the segments that Sizwe or Samgana presented on, especially on SNL, I was hoping to see maybe specific livestock systems that are, major contributors in the current criminal land that we are using under SNL. Is it the general communal grazing, the feedlotting, and so on and so on? And then another question on this was on the non-dairy. There was a slide or table there, where he mentioned that other livestock that it's easy to get the data. But when I was looking the other list below the non-dairy, there were other specific, livestock there. And when I look at the general livestock that our farmers, are heading at their household, like poultry, goats, those are the main ones. So my question is that under the non-dairy, what are the remaining livestock that are there? Because just below, he was able to unpack very well horses and everything, but what is then remaining there if you were able to unpack very nice in the under the list? And then last question to Julian. I think the sources were well presented in all the livestock value chain, but then you mentioned, I think maybe in passing, or I missed it, the mitigations, the mitigation approaches that you are proposing, or your presentation was only focusing on the sources. Pardon me if I missed the mitigation part in terms of what are the livestock farming systems that maybe you are proposing that you want us to monitor and gather the data for future reporting. Thank you very much.
Okay, so Sizwe or Sam Kelly, if you could respond to those quite quickly, please, because we want to try and get back onto the time.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you so much, Robert, for those comments and questions. I think I'll start and then Samuel can add. The first one that you touched on was trying to understand the linkage between the two, and especially touching on the different systems that exist within the communal land where we're saying the livestock is found dominantly. So I'm sorry that we didn't go to that detail, Robert, because we could only really put so much into this slide. But then also, the truth of the matter is that there hasn't been a kind of a formal documentation of the different production systems that exist between in the country. So otherwise, as you rightly pointing out, there is the different kinds of systems, and what this work is building on now is trying to capture those systems, because for the purpose of this modeling for this tier 2, we needed now to get into the actual areas where these systems are taking place and try categorize them and try deal with the kind of systems that are found within the high field, within the middle field, and then break down as to what really goes towards maybe that feedlotting that we are talking about, what is just the communal feeding, you know, that percentage. But there isn't really a documentation, proper documentation that I'm aware of that tries to deal with that. And as someone who is on the ground, Mabunza, I think you would appreciate better the complexity that within a very, very small community, for example, the dynamics that are going on in as far as farmer so and so is doing something different from farmer so and so. So it will be very, very hard to comprehensively discuss the systems to that level. And then on the second part, you asked, okay, that one is on the dairy, non-dairy. Sorry that we should have been specific. So in that table where we are dealing with the dairy, non-dairy, we are basically dealing with, if I can quickly find that slide.
We need to be quite quick, Sizwe, to get another couple of questions.
Okay, okay, Tim, sorry. So the top part, Robert, was just showing purely livestock. So purely cattle. So the cattle, we grouping them into either dairy or non-dairy. But the lower table was now showing the other livestock other than cattle. So that is where now the sheep, the goats, the pigs, and all that is coming in. Otherwise, that top part, when we're saying non-dairy, we're referring to purely the non-dairy cattle. Thank you, Tim.
Yeah, so beef cattle mostly, I suppose.
Yes.
Producing beef.
Yes.
Yeah, Dr. Roland, thank you very much, Robert, and thank you for the responses. Dr. Roland Solani had a hand up earlier. Do you have a question still? Or?
Yes, good morning. My name is Roland Kolan Lamin, the Director of Veterinary and Livestock Services. I just wanted to provide a quick clarification on two issues. The first one is that the 2017 dip in exports actually was a result of suspension of exports to the EU for, I would say, disease control purposes. We had received a consignment of buffaloes that we had to ensure that they were free from diseases. Then the second clarification that I want to provide is that the drought 2016-2017, in fact, the main cause of death is shortage of drinking water rather than feed. Lack of water was the main cause of death, dehydration. And then the last one I want to provide is that, or to put on the table is actually, yes, any assessment or inventory that is conducted in the country must take into consideration that we do get these droughts. We had a drought in 92, we had a drought in maybe 2008, but it was mild. Then we had this one in 2016. Surely another drought is coming before we get maybe to 2026. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roland. That's very useful to have that clarification. And I think being able to be resilient against droughts will be an important mitigation measure to avoid loss of animals. And increase productivity thereby. Now, Alessandra and Juliana had a couple of points to make, but we are at we're gone past 10:15. So if you forgive me, Ali and Juliana, let's crack on with the presentation now that we're back on track.
Yes, totally fine.
And they'll hopefully, you know, if there's a pause in the discussions, then please make a note of your questions and take them up later. Okay. Thank you very much. Now, Alessandra, would you please share your screen? Alessandra Falcucci is a consultant with us working on Gleam. Alessandra has been working on Gleam for many, many years, and she specializes on the ruminant side of the model. So Ali has been working tirelessly throughout this project, working on the data and the modeling side of things. So, so over to you, Alessandra. Alessandra's going to talk to us about Gleam.
Can you see my screen?
Yep, we can see your screen and hear you perfectly.
But I don't, I cannot see mine now. So I think that there is a.
Now we see your
okay. No, I'm set also on my computer. I mean, the screen for a while is completely black, but I mean, I'm set now.
You see your presentation mode.
You can see? Okay.
Yep.
Hi, as a team mentioned, I'm working for FAO for a long time. And I always work on Gleam. That is a tool that Juliana already mentioned in her presentation, and it is the acronyms for Global Livestock Environmental Assessment Model. A first draft idea of Gleam is present in the publication of FAO of 2005, Livestock Long Shadow. This report aims to assess the full impact of the livestock sector on the environmental problems, along with the potential technical and policy approaches to mitigation. So the livestock long shadow can be thought as the starting point of Gleam. After that, we developed the tool, and we've had, several publications after livestock long shadow. Tackling climate change in 2013 and 5 practical action in 2017. And now we are in the process of revising the tool on a global scale to provide what we call Gleam 3. Gleam, as I told you, is a global livestock environmental assessment model, is a GIS tool. This means that we work with the spatial, with the geographic dimension of the emissions, but not only. Because the Gleam born as a tool to estimate the GHG emission in the livestock supply chains, but after it was extended to also to the natural resource use efficiency, to feed, land use, nitrogen balance, and so on. And now we also add the biodiversity and also the water component, and also the soil carbon sequestration. Gleam is a life cycle assessment modeling, so it takes into account, as also Juliana mentioned in her presentation, not only the direct emission, but also the indirect emission from feed production, but also energy and in the farm, but also the energy for feed production and post-farm emission to packaging and transformation of the animal product. Gleam is based on the IPCC Tier 2 equation, and as I told you, is a geographic. Take into account also the geographic dimension. And so we are able to work on a different scale, from the global to the country, but also to the production system specific, but also at cell level. Gleam is a very flexible tool and allow us also to implement scenario analysis and assessment of mitigation option. It was developed by FAO, but in collaboration with other partners and university. So, I mean, this slide is more or less the one that you have also seen in Juliana's presentation, and is just give you what are the boundaries of the emission that Gleam can take into account. And Gleam work with 3 gases. We have carbon dioxide that is produced in different stages of the life cycle, but also with the methane produced as direct emission from enteric fermentation, but also from emission from manure management system, and also with the nitrous oxide, again in the different compartment of the supply chain. This is a very schematic workflow of Gleam. On the left side, there is the list of the input data that we need to run the model. Most of them are spatial explicit, so we have data for the different areas of the world. We have the distribution, the livestock distribution of the livestock distribution. We have the crop distribution, but we also need parameters for the herd, like the mortality, the fertility of the animals, how the manure is managed. What are the diet of the animals, what are the climatic conditions, because these affect the emission factors. All these data are integrated in the GIS environment. And as I said, we use the IPCC guidelines, and we also follow the enhanced transparency framework for the global warming potential values. And the results is not only, as I said, the emission coming from the different compartment of the livestock supply chain, but also the production of the different species. In fact, we work with 6 livestock species, 4 ruminant species, cattle, sheep, goats, and buffalo, but also with pigs and chicken. I said that I mean, we work with the tier 2 approach. I know that after my presentation, there is the presentation of Andreas on the difference between tier 1 and tier 2 approach. So I just want to give you a very brief highlight on the differences between the two. If we calculate and estimate the emission with a tier 2 with a tier 1 approach, we have just an emission factor that's not that doesn't change over time, and we multiply this emission factor by the number of animals that we have to obtain the emission at the total emission for that particular species. Naturally, mean, as you see, this emission factor doesn't change over time, and this does not allow us to track the impact of mitigation action, because all the animals are treated in the same way. If we move to a tier 2 approach, the emission factor are not a standard coefficient, but is estimated taking into account the typology of the animals, so their age, their breeding status, their reproductive performance, but also the diet is very important in the estimation and in the production of the emission, like for example in the enteric fermentation. And having this information allow us to better capture the real value of the emission factors. And these, so changing the diet, for example, or changing the reproductive performance allow us to calculate the new emission factor associated with these different parameters. And naturally, these allow us to have to follow the changes over time of the emission factor, and also to capture the differences when we adopt an intervention on the livestock. This is, I mean, more in detail what is how Gleam works. It's a little bit complex, but I mean, in each of the points that you see, so with the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, is where we enter a specific value that allow us to calculate the emission not with the tier 1 approach, but with the tier 2 approach. So the data collection that is behind the Gleam is huge. Especially when we work at a country level, we need the expertise of the expert of the countries to better capture the values and the specificity of the countries, of the livestock in that countries, of the production system present in the countries. And these are some of the outputs that we can produce with Gleam. On the left side, you can see, for example, the estimation of the protein at a global level and the contribution of the different species to the protein production in the different regions of the globe. And on the right side, I mean, is the estimation of the emission, and again the contribution, the share of the different species in the different part of the world. Another outputs of Gleam is the share of the different gases to the total amount of the emission. So, for example, the first pie chart is the share between methane, carbon dioxide, and nitrous oxide for the ruminant species. So you see the different contribution of the different source, and the one below is for the two monogastric species, pigs and chicken. And because we work with the geographical space, so we have detailed information, we are also to provide the range of the emission intensity. So, for example, for beef here, you see that on average in the at a global level, 1 kilogram of protein beef has a 295 kilogram of CO2 to produce, I mean, that amount of protein. But I mean, this is just the average value, because I mean, we have a huge range of emission intensity in the world, and this allows us also to implement mitigation and intervention, try to move from the from the less efficient way of producing meat on a GHG emission point of view toward a more effective and sustainable meat production. And this, I mean, is just to show you better what does it mean, the spatial element of the analysis in Gleam. We have all this data that I show you, I mean, as a precise geographic reference. So each pixel, each portion of the globe has its number of animals, emission coefficient, specificity of manure management, and these allow us to obtain very detailed emission estimates. What I show you is just the global model, but as I said, I mean, we work also to support countries in tackling climate change, and we work with a lot of countries in South America, in Africa, and in South Asia, but also in Central Asia. And we develop baseline for GHG assessment. And we are able also to, as I told you, to modeling and testing intervention scenarios, like, for example, what we have done in Argentina, where we implement several mitigation options, acting and taking into account the element that have space for improvement, like the feed component or the breeding, yes, the genetic and the breed improvement, but also intervention on disease, and these allow us to check and to verify how these intervention affect the estimation of the emission, but also the change in the productivity, with the intent of reducing especially the emission intensity. So how many kilograms of CO2 emission are needed to produce 1 kilogram of milk or meat, accordingly to the commodity that we are interested in. And now, I mean, for what we have done for Eswatini. We again, I mean, we have worked with the spatial data, so we collect with the help of Sweden and some CCAC data on the protected areas, on land use, on administrative units and agroecological zone that Sizwe has already mentioned in his presentation. And we are able to customize for Eswatini the livestock distribution map. In this slide, you see, for example, on the left side, the distribution of the sheep population in Eswatini, where from the global model that we have in FAO, produced with the collaboration of University of Brussels and Marius Gilbert. We customize the distribution accordingly to the specificity and the request that some CCAC and Sweden provide us. For example, I mean, the protected areas and the plantation. In the protected areas and in the plantation, you don't have animals, and so we customize the distribution of the graded livestock of the world for Eswatini, and so this is the results for the sheep on the left, for cattle in the middle, and for goats on the right side. And these are so the density of the per square kilometers of the three species in Eswatini. And this is the base with which we work in Gleam. And this is very important because this allows us also to better define and be more precise when we designed an intervention. Because an intervention in one agroecological zone can be different from the one implemented in another agroecological zone. And also with this spatial dimension, we are able to understand and to know how many animals we are the intervention affect. Yes, and also, for example, in the case of drought, there could be part of the countries that is more affected by drought than another part of the countries. So, I mean, having the spatial dimension, I think that is very very important. Sorry, I cannot move further. Why? Sorry,
Is everything okay? They were on the livestock distribution.
Yeah, but I cannot move. Okay, now I can move. Okay.
Okay.
Then I mean, so to allow us to
try and wrap up fairly quickly, Ali.
Yeah, sorry. To allow us to run the Gleam model, as I said, I mean, we need a lot of information, and we have fortunately the expertise of some CAEP and Swiss, but also a consultative group of 14 experts from Eswatini, and we also use a lot the annual report, the production annual report, and the census summary of 2018, beside the literature review. And we obtain all this information by production system, and we use, I mean, we adopted 2 production systems in Eswatini, one that is the dual purpose and the dairy farm, so a more intensive dairy production. And we also try to have all this information by agroecological zone and regions. The data that we collect are on herd performances, so mortality, fertility, replacement rate, the live weight of the animals, the productivity, so the milk yield, the milk yield of the animals in the dual purpose production system and in the more intensive one. And it's also very important having the complete feed ration of the animals, as well as the manure, how the manure is treated and managed. Okay, then these are the draft results of the first run of Gleam for Eswatini. The output, as you see, is very in line with what Juliana mentioned in the previous presentation, and as I said, I mean, not only estimate the emission, but also the production of the different system and species. And as you see, naturally, I mean, the dual purpose cattle, I mean, has the higher share both of the emission production and for Eswatini. But as I said, I mean, it's also very important to see that the different species has a different emission profile. I mean, on average, a cattle has an emission of around 5 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per head, while the one of sheep and goats are much lower of the one of the cattle. And I mean, the different, I mean, naturally, as you see, the enteric fermentation represents practically the totality of the emission per head in all the three species. And accordingly to the data that we collected, we are able to differentiate the emission per head by cohort. And this is what I mentioned before. This is the tier 2 approach. So the different cohorts, the different animals are treated and emitted in a different way. And this is very important also when we work with the mitigation and the intervention. And again, I mean, this is again to show, I mean, how we can deal with the so detailed information. In the Highveld in Eswatini, this is the profile of the emission for a milking cows, and this is the on the right side the profile emission from in low-veld Manzini region. So you see that there is a big difference between the two regions, and this allows us to customize and to better design the intervention and to monitor, I mean, with the inventory along the time series, the changes in the emission in Eswatini. And to conclude, I mean, this is the other important element is to attribute, so to allocate the emission to the different product that coming out from the livestock supply chain. I stop here. I'm sorry
Thank you very much, Alessandra. Sorry to have to rush you at the end. That's very nice. That's very comprehensive. Now, what we have is we're developing a front end for Gleam, which is interactive and lets people explore in more detail the data and do it interactively. And Dominic Wisser has been developing this for us. Dominic's a consultant working with our group, and Dominic has produced this Gleam dashboard, and he has very kindly adapted it to look specifically, it's under development, but he's adapted it to look very specifically at the Eswatini data that we've just managed to produce. And so Dominic is going to guide us through the dashboard, and then I think there's going to be an opportunity for people to interact with it themselves. So thanks very much, Dominic, and over to you. Can't seem to hear you, Dominic.
I had to find the unmute button, sorry. Yeah. Thanks, Tim, and good morning, everybody. So we have seen it's a very rich, Gleam is a very rich product in terms of data, both on input data and output data, and sometimes it's a bit difficult to really highlight interesting and relevant data sets and to really see what the interesting stories are. And some of the quick wins that, for example, Juliana mentioned are only obvious once we compare different production systems, different regions and different animal species, for example, to see where the mitigation options are. So to provide an easily accessible interface, a web application to the Gleam data, we have developed this Gleam dashboard prototype that Tim mentioned. I'm going to paste the link in the chat in a few minutes. But I just want to walk you through the main features of this interactive dashboard for the Gleam Eswatini data. So data is organized into these five main regions: animal population, animal products, emissions, emissions per head, and emission intensities. And if we start with the animal population, you see that there is 3 core pieces of information for the entire country. That's the animal population of cattle, goats, and sheep. And then the lower section of the page has a more detailed view on different species and their distribution in different ecological zones. So as you hover over the bars, you can see the numbers of heads behind the animal herd size. You can choose different animals. You can look at the 2 different herds. And you can also access the underlying data directly when you go to table, and then you can copy the table, copy as a CSV, or send it to your printer, download it for further processing in a spreadsheet or whatever you want to do with it. The next section is animal production. So that's the output in terms of meat and milk and protein. And here you see a summary of the production statistics for the country for meat, milk, and protein. As you go down, you see this Sankey diagram that helps you to explore where animal products are produced, which herd, and also which where they're coming from, which agroecological zones. So this basic Sankey diagram shows you that most of the all of the milk is coming from cattle, of course, and most of the carcass weight is also coming from cattle. You can also drill deeper when you select the agroecological zones, and then you can see where the production of milk is coming from, which is the contribution of each zone and each herd to carcass weight and milk. And we can refine this further by looking at herd types. So we have the dual purpose and the dairy herd. And again, here, if you hover over the diagram, you see the underlying value behind this chart. Again, you can download the data, the underlying data in CSV format. And there's another way to look at it, and that's the bar chart for this particular domain. Emissions, of course, is a key output here for us, and emissions are, as was mentioned before, we distinguish between direct and indirect emissions, and here's a little button that allows you to change to direct emissions only, and then you will see that the values will immediately change according to this selection, and will only show emissions for enteric fermentation and manure management. We also have the option of changing the global warming potential for the two gases, nitrous oxide and methane, and that will immediately change values. So here for emissions, we also have the, this is a similar diagram that you've seen before for products, where we see, just a second, where we see where emissions are generated, which herd is generating the emissions. Now there's a problem at the server where we host this application. Yeah. I'm sorry for this.
It's okay, these things are out of our control.
Yeah. Okay, so, and you can see what are the gases that are produced by each herd. And of course, this is a very interesting entry point, for example, for mitigation, for targeting mitigation options. We can look at this a bit further and see what are the different sources that contribute to the different gases and where they originate, what herds and even what agroecological zones. And of course, the emissions for methane are dominated by CH4, and then there are different contributions to other emissions. Another way to look at it is a pie chart that shows you the composition, maybe in a more intuitive way, for, in this case, for all ruminants and for direct emissions only. You have the options to download the data or to look at the data and see the raw data and a detailed data set by agroecological zones and for all types of sources. We also have the emissions per head, and this is a similar setup. So in the interest of time, I will just move to emission intensity. It's a similar graph. It's a bar chart that shows you when you hover over the composition of emissions. Again, you can choose direct emissions only, you can choose different agroecological zones. And of course, this again is an interesting comparison between different animals, of course, but also you can compare different regions and maybe identify options for mitigation or explain important differences. So this is a very quick overview of the dashboard. What we have intended to do is to have you play with it a little bit. And I'm going to share the link in the chat.
I think Amanda already has, actually, Dominic.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yeah. And I think Armando has prepared a little quiz that with a couple of questions on data that we would like you to answer in the next couple of minutes. So over to you, Armando.
Thank you very much, Dominic.
Thank you, Dominic. In times, I really encourage to everyone to play with the dashboard. It's a really good dashboard where you can get the information that was constructed for Eswatini. You can, when you start working with the dashboard, you will get and you will find that it's really really easy to use and really easy to understand and to extract information from it. So what we prepare for now is a little quiz. I mean, we will put like some questions. Probably you can go to the dashboard and then you can answer some of the questions that we have right now. Let me launch. Okay, I think you can see the poll.
Yep.
Yep. So there are 5 questions here in the poll. So it is asking, for example, in the first one, in cattle, what is the amount of gases per animal in the middle belt region? So it will be good if you go to the dashboard and try to find what is the answer of this question and then vote to this. In the second question, we have what is the total direct emissions from goat in the Highfa region? Then, like I said, you can go to the dashboard. You can go exactly and see and try to find this information with the links that you have in the dashboard in the left, and then you can play with the numbers, and then you can find what is the right answer for that. And the same for the rest of the questions. I don't know, probably Tim, we can go for the questions while the people is interacting. If some people have questions with the presenters, and then at the end of the round question time, we can go and see if we can explain a little of the answers from this quiz. Do you think it's good?
Yeah, no, that's fine. I'm actually trying to load the app. Does anyone else manage to have it running at the moment? Because I've got that same server running.
Yeah, it seems to be a problem at the server side this morning. I don't know. I can try to restart, but I think there's something that we cannot control.
No. Are other people having the same problem?
Yes, mine is not opening. It keeps sending the message, please wait.
Yeah. Look, I think in the interests of not wasting time, let's wait until the mine's just opened now. But it does seem a little problematic, but my internet is also problematic. So
yeah, I think that yes, it's running out. What if we just I put the questions into the chat?
No, it's
it seems to be a problem at the server side.
Yeah.
Very slow. Maybe
I can
send an email. Yeah.
Sorry, I can put the questions in the chat, and then probably during the day they can check, and then tomorrow with the Then
Yeah,
we can check the answers and everything.
Yeah,
that's a good idea.
Okay,
And
perfect.
if you put the questions in the chat, if people write down their answers, and then when we come to, because if they're in the chat, you obviously won't be able to gather the answers. But I mean, that doesn't necessarily matter much.
yeah.
But yeah. So let's try and look at it a bit later on.
Okay.
But that was a very nice walk through the system, and Dominic's put a lot of work into developing this. So it's been through a good number of iterations, and this is the first time it's really been used in anger. So I'm very pleased to see it in being tried out by other people. Alessandra, you have a question.
No, Tim, sorry, I don't. It is not a question. It's more. I don't know if Dominic highlighted in his presentation, but the results are at the moment are still draft. So I mean, we are still working on these. So it's. I mean, the dashboard is not. I mean, there could be. I mean, changes in the values in the next days or weeks. When we have feedback on the value that we have.
Yeah, no, that's a very, very good point, Alessandra. So these are very much preliminary draft results, haven't been verified, and we haven't sort of checked for glitches. So please, this is just for this training workshop. Please don't send the link further afield, but we'll make the link available to everybody in the training workshop, and it'll remain available. So you will have access to this way of taking different slices of views into the data. Do we have any questions from about the dashboard, about Gleam in general, about Ali's presentation of the Eswatini results? Questions or comments? Ali, your hand's still up, but I guess that's a hangover.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Right.
Sorry.
Any comments? Ali, it seems in the end you did see quite significant differences between the different emission intensities across the different production systems. That was interesting, because the earlier sort of data we had was showing very similar herd parameters across the systems, but in fact in the end, there were quite significant differences. Can you just talk us through those a little?
Yes, I mean for sure in the case of the cows, the big difference is the milk yield. That especially for the intensive one, so the dairy farm animals are different between the region, and we work a lot with Armando, and also the consultation with the Eswatini expert and the help of Suisse and Samkele was great. So I mean, we start I mean, with probably not with with correct parameters, but along the way we are able to better define and to arrive to something that is that makes sense. I mean, we still need to adjust some of the parameters, like the one of the fertility and the replacement rate, but I think that we are on the right way to yes. So I mean, I'm quite satisfied with the results, and also with the differentiation that we have inside the countries. Probably what can be a little bit more improved is the diet of the animals, because at the moment we have just one diet for all the cohort in the same agroecological zone. So while probably I think that, for example, the cows that are in the dairy farm received much concentrate than the one that are not in the dairy farm, so kept the public land. But I think that we still have some time to work on this.
Yeah. We have others who have questions or thoughts. Please raise your hands. Comments. Do people think the dashboard will be a useful thing for people to explore the emissions? Dominic, what do you think the the biggest use for the dashboard will be as we continue to develop it?
Yeah, I think what would be really useful to make it more interactive in a way that it can calculate or assess the impact of mitigation on the fly. I think that would be useful if, for example, we decide to change a diet, we decide to change a herd structure, and we can get some indication of what this would be mean in terms of emissions and production. I think so. It would. I think the final goal would be to have an online tool of the whole modeling framework that would allow answering this kind of questions. I think that would be useful to explore different options in an easily accessible interface.
Hello, Tim.
Yes, Amanda.
Yes, I want to highlight this question. It was coming from different people, but Alessandra, could you please let us know what happened when we have new guidelines from the IPCC or new change into how they calculate the emissions? Gleam is adapted to this change.
Yes, I mean, as I said, it's flexible. So I mean, it's just a matter of changing the code. I mean, where the IPCC, I mean, change the formulation or the equation or the emission factor and so on. But practically, what the Python, what the code of Gleam does is to replicate on a computer basis the equations that are present in the IPCC guidelines and apply to the spatial dimension. So, I mean, it's something that can be done.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, thanks. Now I've seen we've sort of got 10 minutes, and there don't seem to be many questions. But I've seen, but Deepa tells me that the dashboard is opening. So
yes.
So if people could try and open it and see if you can answer a couple of the questions. We've got the questions back up from Armando. So the first question is, what's the amount of gas per animal, cattle, in the mid-belt region? So if you can navigate.
We can, Tim, if you think it's, we can at least go through the first question in the dashboard. I can share the screen and then we can interact and show everyone how it works, probably. Because as I said, I was practicing with some of the questions, but I can, from the beginning, start and see how to get the right answer from the dashboard.
Yes,
so,
I've just done that. So, but you share your screen, Amanda,
okay.
And let's guide people through the first question.
Yeah. So.
We have 10 minutes to play, so.
Yeah. So tell me
anyone
if
who has a question, just please shout out and feel free to interrupt us.
So can you see my screen?
Yep.
Perfect. So the first one is, what is the amount of gases per animal in the middle belt region? So we need gases per animal. So we have these emissions per head here in the left, as you can see. So when we click here, and then we said, okay, we need the amount of gases. We are not talking about direct emissions, so we take this out to see the total amount of gases. Then we just go for cattle. We take out sheep, and then we see that it's showing in the middle belt. So here we have the middle belt, and then we have that is around. We have the different gases here. One is showing the numbers per head, and sorry. Dairy herd. Okay, so it's totally cattle. Give me 1 second. I have. Okay, so dairy herd, 12 post. Okay, so in the plot, I think it's the best option to see. Emissions per head, cattle. What is the amount of gases per animal in the middle belt region? So we have the middle belt region. Okay, I think that let's go for direct emissions. Okay, so we can see, because it was the complete, the direct emissions, it was a complete full numbers. But if we go for the direct emissions, we have in the middle belt that we have from enteric fermentation around 1,870. And then we have for manure management of about 59. And then we have for the manure management nitrate oxide around 20. So that will be, so that the answer totally is 2,023 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per head, as you can see. So in this case, sorry for that, but I was referring to the question about what is the amount of direct emissions for the cattle. As you can see, what I did, and it was good that in the example that I was checking, that all the things that we go through the dashboard, it's easy for us to understand exactly what is the amount of emissions and how to get the data from the dashboard and from the graphics. However, as you can see, there is a table where we can extract exactly all the data that we required for the different data sets that we are analyzing right now. And for example, if we go for the second question and it says in goats, what is the total direct emissions for goats in the Highfa regions? So we are not talking now about emissions per head. So in the left, we go just for emissions. And then we take out sheep, cattle, and we just stay with goats. And we put direct emissions. I think that is, wait, let me. Okay, yeah, let's go. Yeah, it's emission. Okay, we go for direct emissions. We take sheep and cattle out of the analysis. We have just goat, and then it's asking what is the total direct emissions for goat in the Highfa region. So we have here goat, and this is a good example, actually, the one that we are analyzing now. So, sorry, but here, as you can see, we have just from this species how they produce methane and how they produce nitrous oxide, because it's just here in the app, in the select node, it's just per gas. But we need about agroecological zone. So we activate the agroecological zone, and then we can filter how is the distribution through the agroecological zone and according to the different gas that they are producing. So in our question, and let me say, it says in the middle region, what is the amount of gases, sorry, in the Highfa region, what is the total direct emissions for goat? So we go to the Highfa here, we go for goat, and this you can see here is highlight what are the direct emissions for Highfa for goat. Then after Highfa is divided by methane, and then the lower one is showing how much nitrous oxide we have from that gas. So if we put our mouse over that, is giving us the value of nitrous oxide, and then here is the value of methane. But if we go back and we set from goats to the Highfa and we highlight and just leave the mouse over it, it's showing 42,680 tons of CO2 equivalent. So the answer is going to be the number 4. As you can see, this is that is the important part that we wanted to show over the dashboard, because at the beginning it looks a little bit complicated to understand the graphics, but once that you start playing with it and you start to understand, it's really easy to get the information that we require and the specific information that we want to analyze. So we can, like I said, in this same example, we can introduce, for example, the herd. I mean, the goats are the same herd, but if we go for cattle, we will see exactly what, let's take goats, sorry, for cattle. Then we will see that the dairy herd is in a different position because we have different number of animals that are just for dairy purpose. And then we have the majority of the country do it for dual purpose. So you can see exactly, and you can see with the lines, what are the reflection for every gas and for every analysis that we really want to do. I don't know if we have more time or we should keep going for another question.
Let's do one final question.
Okay. So the third one is
while we're doing this, sorry, could anybody who's actually managed to open and play with the tool, could you please just put your hand up in the chat briefly while Orlando is going through this?
Tim, I'm sorry, I think there's a serious problem this morning on the server side. I don't know. It looks like everything is very slow on Shiny apps.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe we try again tomorrow.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Let me go for this question. I think tomorrow we can check the last two if you want.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because it's working in my computer. That I think is good. So the third question is, what is the population of dairy animals in the Lubombo region? Okay. So here in the left, we go to population, animal population, and then we go, okay, we were asking about dairy animals. Okay, so we go for cattle, we take the dual purpose out of the analysis, we stay just with the dairy herd, and then this says in the Lubombo region. So as you can see, if you put the mouse over the different colors, you can see the numbers that are showing for every agroecological zone. Okay, and the Lubombo is showing a number of 47 animals, or 47 animals are reported for the cattle. So it says in the Lubombo region, wait, give me 1 second, 47. I think that I erased the answer when I was translated to the chat, but the right answer here is 47. So it was answer number 1, that is 47 animals.
That's 47,000, presumably.
No, it's just 47.
Is it?
Yeah,
Okay.
because we have 2,135 in the Highfa.
Dairy.
Dairy, it's just dairy, yes. And in the middle belt, we have 1,573, according to the reports and how we made the distribution. But when we put the dual purpose, then is the majority of the animals. You can see that we have, then we have 213,121 for the Highfa, and so on. So the majority of the animals are in the dual purpose herd all over the country.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks very much, Armando and Dominic,
yep.
And also to Alessandra for leading us through the Gleam model and the dashboard. Please try and find a minute to have a go at playing around with the data, because it would be useful to get feedback and to hear from you all about it. Now this brings us on to the next session of the training workshop. I'm very pleased to say we have Andreas Wilkes, who is representing NZ Agric, and Andreas has agreed to join us. Pulled himself away from another meeting, I think, to talk to us about building comprehensive greenhouse gas emissions inventories and the importance of moving from tier 1 to tier 2. So Andreas, perhaps you'd like to introduce yourself in a bit more detail and then share your screen and over to you. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks very much, Tim. Can you hear me fine?
Hear you perfectly.
Good. Yes, as Tim mentioned, my name's Andreas. I'm working with New Zealand Agriculture Greenhouse Gas Research Centre, which manages a lot of the international work on behalf of the Global Research Alliance for Agricultural Greenhouse Gas, GRA, of which I think Eswatini is a member. So some of you will be familiar with other colleagues in New Zealand. I myself am based in the UK. I joined colleagues in New Zealand only this January. Before that, I was working in Kenya and Ethiopia in particular on improving livestock greenhouse gas inventories. So today, as I talk about national inventories for livestock emissions, I will be using examples from our work in Kenya and Ethiopia. Telling stories and using examples is always more informative than general principles and so on. So the main topic I want to talk about is what Alessandra mentioned, moving from tier 1 to tier 2. What does it take? How can it be done? And just share some experiences from other countries. So just recapping some of what was mentioned earlier, measurement, reporting, and verification is the international topic within which inventories is part of that. So thinking about, what are the outputs of all of this? It was previously mentioned that under the Paris Agreement, countries should be communicating a national communication every 4 years, but then also submitting a nationally determined contribution, and then from 2024, a biennial transparency report, which should include a greenhouse gas inventory, as well as some accounting of progress in achieving the nationally determined contribution. Previously, or under the current system, there is no official verification of developing country submissions. There's what's called international consultation and analysis, but under the Paris Agreement, there will be technical expert review, which will look at, among other things, the greenhouse gas inventory. Is it compiled transparently, accurately insofar as possible? Is it complete, and so on? All of these sort of technical questions. Following the 2006 guidelines, and in the future, the 2019 refinement. At present, even most developed countries are still using the 2006 guidelines. Only a few have reported that they've already begun to use elements of the 2019 refinement. So I think that there's some time to make that transition. And just to clarify two other concepts. So greenhouse gas inventories, they quantify annual greenhouse gas emissions. The NDC will need to quantify emission reductions. So the example I have here, the majority of developing countries, they have a business as usual scenario, that's the yellow line, and then they propose to achieve emission reductions compared to business as usual. I think Eswatini is different, at least in the first NDC, 2010 was the base year. So emission reductions would be the difference between the emissions in 2010 and the emissions at any future date. So just to clarify that the two may need different systems for measurement, reporting, and verification, because the inventory, it just quantifies emissions in a particular year, whereas the NDC would need to quantify emission reductions. Nevertheless, the inventory can be a very important tool for used in quantifying the NDC progress towards the NDC targets. So around the question of tier 1 and tier 2, and Alessandra already presented this. Tier 1, which most countries in Africa are using, basically in the IPCC tier 2, IPCC guidelines, there are tables, and it tells you for each region of the world, it tells you how many emissions do you get per animal. That's the emissions per animal, and then you multiply that by the number of animals in your country, cattle, sheep, goats, and so on, which is very practical, and almost all countries in the world have been using this approach, but it has some limitations, as was mentioned. In particular, the emissions per animal, they are fixed depending on which continent you're living in. It doesn't change over time. There's no difference between production systems. So, for example, in some other Southern African countries where they distinguish between a commercial sector, emerging farmers, and a communal sector where animals are raised in different feeding systems, different breeds, the tier 1 approach is not able to pick up these differences. And if you implement some mitigation actions, the emissions per animal are the same. So the only way you can show mitigation in your inventory with a tier 1 approach is if you reduce the number of animals, but there are not many countries in the world where reducing animal numbers is a viable policy. So this is why the tier 2 approach is more useful. How this works is you have the number of animals, you estimate the intake of gross energy per animal, and then you estimate the emissions per unit of intake, so the methane conversion factor. So this means that when you compile the inventory, apart from putting in the numbers of animals in the country each year, you can break it down as has been shown in the use of Gleam and all the work that's been done to prepare the data for that. You get a more detailed classification of animals, by production system or agroecological zone, but also by sex and age category. And you can, if data is available, you can then also track the change in the intake per animal. Mostly this is not done by measuring intake, it's done by using data on animal performance, such as live weight, milk yield, reproduction rate, and calving rate, and so on, which is used to predict intake per animal. And as the diet quality changes, you can also change the emissions per unit of intake. So this means the Tier 2 approach is able to reflect changes in the structure of the sector. If you have, for example, a growing dairy sector or increasing feedlot, numbers of animals going through feedlots, it's also able to track the change within each subcategory over time. For example, if due to extension programs, average milk yields for dairy cows or average live weight for feedlotted animals, if they are gradually increasing over time, then these kind of changes can all be reflected in the national inventory. This is the same approach that is used in the Gleam model that has been introduced. However, there are some slight differences in the rules and requirements for national inventories compared to Gleam. So Gleam is an excellent tool for, in particular, for looking at future scenarios and identifying where the mitigation options are. I'm going to talk more about how to implement the Tier 2 method in greenhouse gas inventories. So the example I'm going to use is from Kenya. So tell a story rather than just tell you what the rules are. But the real question is, why would a country want to do this? I imagine most of you're here in the workshop, you have some reason why this should be of interest. Certainly in Kenya, it wasn't obvious, and it was only in the last few years that they've begun to make a shift from Tier 1 to Tier 2. And the basic reason was this. Firstly, 41% of their emissions in 2010 were from the agriculture sector. And of that, 90% was from livestock. So within agriculture, livestock is, if they can reduce emissions in livestock, this would be the biggest contribution that agriculture can make to their nationally determined contribution. So they had produced a national climate change action plan, which analyzed the potential future emissions in each sector in the country. And they basically projected a 4% increase per year in emissions from agriculture. And most of that was due to increasing livestock populations. And to make this projection, they used a Tier 1 approach, so they could only reflect the change in population. They couldn't, the Tier 1 approach is not able to reflect changes, for example, in milk yield, where the government has a policy to increase milk output per animal, but they weren't able to reflect that in the policy. In any case, this was the method they used, and they set a mitigation target for the agriculture sector, 2.77 million tons of carbon dioxide. And the question is, well, how can they achieve that? So we worked with them and FAO as well for some years and developed a nationally appropriate mitigation action in the dairy sector. It's a large proposed investment in dairy development, targeting about 15% of the dairy farms in the country. And the basic idea is to increase productivity. And as productivity increases, the intensity of emissions, so emissions per unit of milk, decreases. So you can see in the chart here that as a farm moves from say annual output of about 5,000 kilograms of milk towards 10,000 kilograms of milk, the emission intensity gradually decreases. Now this analysis for the nationally appropriate mitigation action, this was done using a tier 2 approach. So if they get funding to implement this, investment, then they could track the change in emissions just by monitoring change in milk output per farm. And that shows kind of one of the uses of the tier 2 approach. But it presented some problems or challenges for measurement of greenhouse gas in Kenya. You have the dairy NAMA, which is using a tier 2 system for monitoring, reporting, and verification. You've got an NDC that uses tier 1 to make its future projections. Now, obviously, they would want to be aligned to a tier 2 approach. So one of the key tools to achieve that is to improve the national inventory from the tier 1 to the tier 2 approach. So the process that we went through roughly was like this. We held a consultation workshop. This the State Department for Livestock, together with Kenya Statistics Bureau, other stakeholders in the sector. Everyone agreed, yes, we do want to improve the inventory. And they said, let's start with dairy because that's the policy focus. When we've learned how tier 2 works, we can then extend it to other species, dual purpose cattle and sheep and goats and so on. We obtained the funding, which is why there was a 6-month gap between the consultation workshop and a planning workshop. And the planning workshop, we basically went through, we had lots of stakeholders there who could provide relevant data, experts who had their own survey data that might need to be reanalyzed for the purpose of the inventory. And we made a plan of who's going to do what and when. We spent about 6 months collecting, analyzing the data, drafting the inventory, making quality control to ensure that we didn't make any calculation mistakes. And we had the draft inventory reviewed by an expert from New Zealand, and then it was reviewed by national experts and submitted by the State Department of Livestock to the Environment Ministry. So it took, let's say, about a year to go through that process. How it was done in terms of institutional arrangements. So for most sectors, the Ministry of Environment and Forestry in Kenya is in charge of the inventory. And in the past, they were hiring consultants to compile the inventory for each sector. For the tier 2, it really requires a lot of detailed knowledge of livestock science, but also good links to other stakeholders in the sector. So what the agreement that was made is that the State Department for Livestock, that's SDL in the box there, it coordinated the process. It set up a core team of the people who would actually compile the inventory. And it also set up what they called an advisory group, perhaps a bit like the group of consultants that was mentioned in relation to the Gleam exercise. It included representatives from the Bureau of Statistics, from research organizations, and industry associations. And their role really was to provide data, to consult on some key decisions like, should we define should we disaggregate by production system or by agroecological zone, and to review the final inventory. So in terms of data, because that's why it took the best part of a year to complete, it was really around gathering and analyzing the data. So the two key tasks, one is to classify the animal subtypes, and the other was to characterize animal performance. And in the case of the dairy sector in Kenya, milk yields have been growing really quite rapidly. So we had to find data to reflect change in animal performance over time. For animal subcategories, through consultations with the stakeholders and also by looking at the literature, we looked at in the literature what kind of production systems are defined in surveys that were done in the past, so that we could have a consistent definition of production systems over time. They came up with this kind of a categorization. There's 3 production systems: intensive, semi-intensive, and extensive, and 5 different types of animal based on sex and age group. Now, the data sources were quite limited. I think similar to most countries in Africa, there was only data on the total national population. I think even in Eswatini, you have better data available than that. There was no data on the herd structure. So how many heifers are there, how many growing males, and so on. So we used the total national population data, and we used published literature to estimate the percentage of dairy cattle that are male, female of different ages. And then there was no national data on the percentage of cattle in different production systems. So we used expert judgment to allocate each county to one of the production systems, depending on which production system is dominant in that county. So it's not 100% accurate, but it was, let's say, the best available way to disaggregate the sector, given that the only official government data was total population. And the question now that Kenya is addressing is, okay, how to improve the accuracy, given that we found a structure that reflects the basic features of the dairy sector in Kenya. We also had a lot of challenges in finding data on animal performance. So here's an example of how we dealt with that for live weight. So we had in the intensive system, we had some data from different years on the percentage of animals of different breed. So in Kenya, they tend to divide between the large breeds like Holstein Friesian and other breeds, smaller breeds, Jersey and Zebu and the indigenous breeds. So we had data from different years on the percentage of animals of different breeds. And we had data from 1 year on the average live weight of different breeds. So we calculated for 1998, 2008, 2018, the weighted average live weight, which showed a trend of about an increase in 10 kilograms per head over a 10-year period, which kind of makes sense given that the proportion of large breeds is increasing, but also that farmers have been investing a lot in improving feed and animal health and so on. So the experts thought that this 10% increase over 20 years was a reasonable estimate, even though it's basically using breed as a proxy for live weight because of the lack of consistent live weight data. And then we filled in the gaps just using linear interpolation, so a straight line between each of the 3 data points that we did have. And these kind of methods, using proxies, using interpolation methods, these are also described in the IPCC guidelines for inventories. They're perfectly acceptable because you have to use the best available data. Often data is missing, and you need to use certain methods to fill the data, which is especially challenging when you move from tier 1 to tier 2. You can't just do it for the most recent year. You have to do it for the whole time series. Otherwise, any difference in emissions will be due to different methods, not due to actual change in the sector. So just to give you an idea of the main results. So in the case of Kenya's dairy sector, the tier 2 inventory, which is the green line, it gave lower total emissions than the tier 1 method used. But it also showed a different trend, in particular since 2010 or so, when dairy development has really taken off in Kenya. There's been quite a large increase in emissions. So this then means that when they next come to revise their projection for the NDC to 2030, they actually have a different historical trend compared to what they would have had with a tier 1 approach. It also means that emission intensity in Kenya has been decreasing over time. And the discussion at policy level now is how to set targets for further decrease in the emission intensity. So not limiting the growth of the sector, but limiting the impact of growth in the sector on the atmosphere, largely by increasing the productivity of each individual cow, as opposed to increasing the number of cows in the sector. So just to summarize some main points from that particular experience in Kenya, but also others with working in Ethiopia, which now has a tier 2 inventory for all cattle, sheep, and goats. So why is it interesting to improve the inventory for livestock? Many countries include livestock in their NDCs, and future greenhouse gas inventory reporting will require that there is a good, accurate estimate for the livestock sector, especially if the policies in the sector are about developing the livestock sector. Then you need a method like tier 2, which can reflect the change in productivity. And there's also hope. There's not a lot of experience in the world, but there is a lot of people working towards linking with climate finance. So the idea is that if we're able to accurately quantify emission reductions in the livestock sector, can we use this to leverage more investment in agricultural development in line with countries' sustainable development strategies? So there are many different reasons why you might want to improve the inventory for livestock. The question of how, certainly we found both in Kenya and Ethiopia that if the Ministry of Agriculture or Ministry of Livestock has the official mandate for mitigation in the sector, they are very strongly motivated to then improve the greenhouse gas quantification, both to be able to identify mitigation options, as was discussed in relation to the Gleam tool just now, but also to be able to measure, report those, the greenhouse gas effects of policies and programs in the sector. It's also important to have this work led, at least at a technical level, by the livestock agencies, because you need technical inputs. There are not many people in other sectors who can accurately assess, for example, is a certain estimate of the live weight for calves, is that reasonable or not reasonable? That takes livestock experts and people in the stakeholders in the sector to judge that. Basically, in terms of how to do it, there's no country, not even the most developed countries, that have all of the data needed to have a fully accurate and complete tier 2 inventory. Use the best available data, and then when you know which are the key variables that really impact on emissions, focus on those key variables to improve the data over time. So in brief, if this makes sense for Eswatini in terms of livestock and climate change policies, go ahead. Start the process of tier 2 inventories. It's quite important to work out the organizational institutional arrangements so that you can build capacities in the administration, but also in the sector over time for continuous improvement of the inventory. Getting the structure of the inventory right is quite important. So defining production systems, agroecological zones, and subcategories of animal by age and sex. If you can align that with the kind of data that is collected already in the country, then you can continually improve the inventory without having to change the structure. All you're doing is making sure that all the parameters are increasingly accurate over time. So that's just some sharing some experience from Kenya and some lessons from our work. In terms of New Zealand, I'd just like to end by introducing that since January of this year, New Zealand government, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, has begun to fund a 4-year program to improve livestock greenhouse gas inventories in Africa and Southeast Asia. And we're in discussion with them about a sub-program focusing on Southern Africa. The idea being that apart from South Africa that already has a tier 2 inventory, for other countries, there's always some data gaps. Could we pull the data from similar agroecological zones or similar production systems in different countries in the region and therefore help bring together the data needed for tier 2 inventories in Southern Africa? That's the idea. We are still seeking approval of that funding from the New Zealand government. So I can't promise anything, but if that goes ahead, I would really hope that Eswatini could both benefit from that, for example, by filling data gaps using data from the wider region, but also contribute to it with some of the excellent data that you have in the country, including what has already been compiled as part of the collaboration with FAO here. So I look forward to possibly being in touch with you or on that issue and seeing how we can move together to improve the livestock inventory in Eswatini. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andreas. And we have a few minutes for questions for Andreas. So please, if Andreas, stop sharing his screen, then please raise your hands or just shout out. Alessandro.
Andreas, thank you very much for your presentation. I mean, it's very interesting. I have a question that sometimes, someone asked me, and it's very difficult to find an answer. You show an example where the tier 2 is improving the estimate, but at the same time, the estimates are lower than the one of tier 1. Has never happened that the tier 2 approach give you a higher estimate of tier 1? How, in this case, naturally the country, are less prone to adopt a tier 2, I imagine. So how you deal with with this, and how you what is your reasoning to in any case go for a tier 2 approach if this is the case? Thanks.
Thank you, Alessandra. Yes, it does happen that tier 2 gives a higher estimate. We had that with several animal species in the Ethiopia inventory. And I don't know if you're familiar with a report that GRA and CCAFs we put out about 2017 or so, where we reviewed all uses of tier 2 in the world. And I think in about a third of cases, emissions with the tier 2 approach were higher than with the tier 1 approach. That doesn't stop you going ahead and adopting it. Obviously, there's politics involved. In Ethiopia, we worked out that the tier 2 inventory had higher total emissions than the tier 1 inventory. That was not a problem for them to adopt it in the inventory. They were glad to know in more detail where are the emission hotspots in the country, and therefore to be able to focus their mitigation efforts on that. Where it became a challenge was from the second half of last year until now, where they've been revising their NDC, and they have to revise their target for emission reductions by 2030. Then they perceived it, or some in the environment sector perceived it was a challenge that actually emissions in the sector were higher than they had originally projected in the first NDC, because it just made it difficult for them to adhere to the general global expectation that each NDC would be progressively more ambitious, yet it was actually being more challenging because the emissions were higher. But the difficulty is not technical, that's largely a political difficulty. So yeah, it could equally be that emissions are higher with a tier 2 approach than a tier 1.
Yeah, and I guess that's based on the IPCC's assumptions for the tier 1 inventory. Sizwe has a question for you, Andreas.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you so much, Andreas, for the presentation and sharing these experiences for other countries. I think the one thing that I would have loved to see, unfortunately, I had a bit of interference. My connectivity was not good. So I'm wondering if you could share maybe a link or anywhere where we can find full documentation of these interventions, just so we learn more on these experiences from the other countries.
Sure.
And then secondly, quickly, is just to say that having worked a bit with the data and appreciating the amount of gaps that we have as a country, I think both ministries, fortunately, they are well represented. Even the director of the Department of Vet and Livestock Services is here, and the Minister of Tourism and Environmental Affairs that houses the climate change unit is here. So it will be very, very useful, and it will be very, very appreciated to us as a country if such that you are trying for would succeed, because then it would assist us to ensure that we fill up these massive gaps that we have, especially for the agriculture sector. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. No, I can see, and I have a sense from the high level of attendance in this workshop that this is a topic of high interest, and certainly from the New Zealand side, so long as we're able to secure the resources we have, we'll be back in touch to see how we can work together on that. Just in terms of the documentation, I will share the tier 2 dairy inventory and actually the tier 2 inventory for Ethiopia with the FAO team. And together with my presentation, I'm happy for those to be shared with everyone present. There's nothing like looking at another country's inventory and seeing how did they do it, what level of detail did they go into, and so on, and you would get a very, very clear idea of, yeah, we could do this in Eswatini, or no, we can't do that, but we could do something else. So I will share those with the FAO team, and please do share it with other stakeholders in the sector, anyone who might be interested.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
And I think in Eswatini we have this great opportunity that is offered by the dip tank system of data collection. So we have this very, very detailed, very widespread, very, very complete infrastructure for data collection. And I think it's really a matter of adapting that system so that it's collecting the data that is specifically relevant to the inventory work, and also linking it to a procedure where it's more ready collected and associated with the different agroecological zones which we use to define the production systems in Eswatini. So there's a very, very rich, potentially very rich source of data that's available, but it will require some adaptations to get it channeled into the right format for very detailed analysis. So I think the potential is very good for detailed data collection, for an inventory, and for monitoring over time. So thank you very much, Andreas. Now we're running a little bit behind time, but that's okay. Now Armando is going to introduce us to a farm level adaptation of the Gleam tool that he's produced. And I think we're just having an introduction to the tool today, and then there'll be a hands-on exercise with the tool tomorrow. So over to you, Armando.
Thank you, Tim. I just want to highlight we just built a tool that is used for in order to understand exactly what a Gleam is doing. And for that, I will share the link with you in the chat. Then you can do as the dashboard, you can play a little bit with the data in this tool in order to know and to understand exactly what is how Gleam is working and what are the changes that you are, I mean, what are the what is the effect when you change some of the parameters. So I put just in the chat the tool, and I will explain a little bit what it's about. Let me see. Here it is. Could you confirm that you can see the screen?
Yep.
Yeah, perfect. So as you mentioned, and as you were hearing in all the presentation, in order to quantify the greenhouse emissions in a tier 2 level, we really need some parameters that we need to collect from the different production system. In the case of this tool that I am showing right now, the Gleam model was adapting to calculate the greenhouse emissions in a farm or in a specific location in order to know and to have some exercise to estimate greenhouse emission in one farm. And this is why this exercise was done on this tool. So in the example that we have here, we have two types of production into this farm. This is for cattle, for direct live emissions from the livestock sector. So we have a milk production and a meat production. So the person can choose exactly which of these two products are coming from the farm. Then they can use a different and fill different parameters, like herd parameters, like number of cows, number of milk cows that are now that they have during the year, and from the total cows, how many were in average during the year producing milk, how many bulls they have during the year in the farm, how many young females, how many young males, how many dead cows they have during the year, how many total dead bulls they have during the year in the farm, as well as the dead male calves, how many dead female calves they have, how many slaughtered cows they have during the year, and how many cows they sold, and the total number of calves that they have during the year. So these are the herd parameters that they need to collect. And actually, these are working together with the national parameters because they are really linked. This is an exercise that is representing the farm level, but actually it's more or less what is representing what we were collecting for Eswatini in the national level. Another parameters are the reproductive variables, and for this we have the age of first calving in average in years. What is the live weight of the cows in average that they have in the farm? What is the live weight of the bulls? what is the live weight of the male calves when they were born, and as well as the female calves. So these kind of parameters in kilograms are difficult to estimate, and most of the time the farmer or the person who is in charge of this data, they have more or less just an interpretation of their knowledge, because they don't have registered or they don't have any data sets that they were collecting. So for that reason, it's important, and you, as you were hearing, it's important to start improving the data collection for the future. But in the terms of the exercise, it's good to understand exactly why we need this data set, and this exercise is for that. So then we have the another parameters that we need is the slaughter weight of the males and the cows. What is the fat of the milk, and what is the protein in the milk in percentage? What is the milk yield in the average in the farm during the year, and what is the lactation period in days? And as well, we have how the manure management is managed into the farm. For example, if they are using dry lot, how much of the manure is managed by putting in that dry lot? How much of the percentage of the manure is storage as solid? How much is making compost? How much of this manure is making anaerobic digester? How much of the manure is daily spread? That means that the cows are in the grass, and every day they are coming with some tools and they are spreading the manure. That is daily spread. How much is burned for fuel, and how much of the manure is not managed, is just left as it is on the grass. In this case, or the example that we have here, we says that 60% of the manure, according to different calculations, you can calculate according to how long the animals are in the grass, how long they are in areas where they are kept for during the different process for farming, and according to these times, you can calculate exactly how much percentage of the manure is managed in different ways. So these are these are some parameters that we require from the population, from the reproductive variable, from the herd parameters. And the other ones are how the animals are feeding. In this case, we have fresh pastures, we have silage, and we have what are the variables that we require from every feeding data is how much percentage of that feeding component you are giving to the adult females, and how much percentage you are giving to another categories like bulls, young males, young females, and so on. Because especially in the dairy sector, the adult females are treated with a different component or a different feeding material because they are producing milk. And the good thing or the best part or the most important part about these variables is that we need to introduce the digestibility and the content of protein of these feeding components. According to that, we can play a little bit with the data sets. For example, in this case, we have the latitude and the longitude of a farm that is located, let me see, close to Mbabane, okay? And we put all these values here, as you can see, we put 74% is they are feeding with fresh pastures, and around 2% with ruminant, and let me see, and 24% are using crop residues from maize, okay, in this example. When you put here compute, what the system is automatically computing all the values and the results, and making a projection of what are the emissions that are producing the different animals that are calculated by Gleam. So in this case, we have the source of emission like methane from enteric fermentation, methane from manure management, nitrous oxide from manure management, and nitrous oxide from manure in the pastures, okay? And from the different animals, now from the milking animals, from the non-milking animals, from the adult males like the bulls, from the replacement females that will replace the animals, because Gleam is computing all these categories of animals, how much emissions are produced by the replacement males, how much emissions are produced by the meat and the males and the meat females, and what is the total emissions per source of gas, okay? But the important thing is that when we sum all of this, we have the total emissions from the farm in this case, in this example. Gleam is computing or is making projections about how much total milk is produced and how much total meat is produced. And then when we allocate according to what we require, so we can compute that in the case of this farm, we have an intensity of emission of 9.99 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per liter of milk. Or in the case of the meat, we have 65.19 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per kilogram of carcass weight. Okay, so this is the introduction of what is this working. And I will show you a little bit, just with one example, what happened if we introduce an action. No, we won't say a mitigation action, but let's say we produce an action into the farm where we reduce the age at first calving. Instead of 2.83, we have now 2.70 years. And then let's say that this action is increasing the milk yield of the animals from 2.5 to 5 liters per animal per day, okay? And instead of managing the manure management in solid storage, we now are using daily spread, for example, or different way of manure management. And then when we compute, we know that before was 16,000, now is 17,000 kilograms of CO2. So with this tool and with Gleam, we want to conclude that with Gleam we can compute and we can simulate different scenarios with the introduction of different actions into the country, or in this case into the farms, and to visualize how the total emissions are changing and how the intensity are changing according to the parameters that we are changing. This is how it is working. This is how Gleam is working. And in the case of this tool, I want to leave to you that you can play a little bit with the parameters. And tomorrow we will make some case studies in order for you to understand what are the parameters that have more impacts into the reduction of greenhouse emissions. So that's it, Tim.
Thank you very much, Amanda.
Yeah.
Okay, so that brings us to a close for today. We had very nice introductions from the FAO rep this morning and from the Director of Meteorology. We've had an excellent overview of the livestock sector and in terms of production and emissions and how it produces greenhouse gases and what the nature of those gases are. We then had an overview of the Gleam model, which has been used to develop the inventory for 2018, which we've been working on under this project, and an overview of the dashboard that enables us to explore the nature of those emissions, and therefore to think about what sorts of areas might be prioritized for intervention. Andreas gave us a very nice overview of the benefits and the needs, in fact, from moving from a tier 1 inventory based just on animal numbers to a tier 2 inventory, which is based on an understanding of the herd structures, and which therefore enables us to account for changes in emissions that will result from improvements in productivity and improvements in herd structure. Armando has introduced this tool to us, and tomorrow morning we will start off by having an interactive session looking at the tool. We'll then focus on data quality, and what the gaps are and what we need to do to improve data quality for tier 2 inventories in Eswatini. And then lastly, we will talk about different types of mitigation actions that can be brought into the livestock sector in Eswatini, and what sort of impacts those can have. So with that, it's just leaves for me to thank you all very much for your participation. Thank you all for giving us your time, and look forward to seeing you all again tomorrow morning. And in the meantime, have a very good afternoon. And please do, if you get the chance, have a look at the 2 tools, have a look at the farm tool, have a look at the dashboard, and play around with them, and hopefully we'll have some nice discussions about those tomorrow.
Sorry, Tim, we had requested Director of Livestock to give closing remarks for today.
Oh, okay.
The agenda, yeah.
Wonderful. Well, I've said what I need to say. So Dr. Rowland, I see you in the chat. Would you like to provide?
Yes, hello.
Thank you.
Hello.
Yes, thank you very much, Rowland.
We can hear you.
Yeah, I understand that you requested that I give closing remarks. So unfortunately, I don't have any prepared closing remarks. But I just want to say that in terms of the assessments, in terms of the inventory that we were talking about, and the contribution of agriculture to the destruction of the ozone and stuff like that, I think it is important to work around that topic. But at the same time, I think as Africa, we find ourselves in a position where we are a bit disadvantaged, because we still have our developmental goals, and that talk to increasing numbers, that talk to a modernization of agriculture. So I think it is important that any investment in the subject considers that we are way behind as compared to the West. So I think that is very important. And in fact, the contribution as countries, I mean, if you look at the contribution, the map that was displayed, if you look at the contribution of Africa to global problems, in fact, in terms of that, is really almost negligible. So I just want the teams to keep that in mind. And the other thing that I want to bring up is that I will request my team, the Swazi team, everybody, to actually focus on what is happening and make sure that we do represent the aspirations of the ordinary people on the ground. The ordinary farmer must, in one way or another, be made to understand the implications of everything that we are doing. Otherwise, thank you very much for the scientific papers that were, the presentations that were given here. And thank you very much to everybody that participated. Looking forward to further engagements. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roland.
Okay, I think that's as final message. All the workshop for today was recorded, so I will share with Deep, and then we can distribute after the workshop for tomorrow, both recordings, in order that you can check exactly what we were doing during the workshops.
Thank you. And we use the same link to join tomorrow at 9 a.m., correct? Tim
Yes.
and Armando?
Yes, tomorrow with the same link.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you all. See you all tomorrow.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Have a good afternoon.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Start to discuss how we move forward. Bye.
Bye.